Hey, it's Brian. Okay, so this week's episode with Stuart Turton contains spoilers for his most recent novel, The Last Murder at the End of the World, and some light spoilers for his previous work. If you're spoiler averse, read the book and come back and check us out when you have. All right, for the rest of us, let's do it. All right, welcome to The Other 51. I'm your host, Brian Moritz, joined this week by one of my favorite authors, author of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, Devil in the Dark Water, and most recently, The Last Murder at the End of the World, which I have here. It's on my iPad, so it's moving around and less impressive than a real book. But the book is impressive. So Stuart Turton, welcome back to The Other 51. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. It's good to see you again.
Good seeing you too as well. So I'm excited to, first of all, for everyone listening, we're probably going to get into spoilers for The Last Murder and for his other books and probably for some mysteries in general, just because it's got to be really hard, I imagine, to do interviews for a mystery novel, but not really talk about the plot, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, all of my interviews on all of my books are always about the first page. That's what I can do. So the first 200 words or something is all I've ever talked about for any book. So this will be a beautiful privilege.
All right. So if you don't want the book spoiled, read it and then come back and we'll be here when you are back. But this book, I was delightfully bonkers. I love this book so much. The way I've been describing it to people when they ask how is it or what is it, I'm like, it's Agatha Christie meets Lost. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly how I was describing it. So I went to my publisher and they're like, what are you thinking of next? And I was like, well, I've got this crazy idea. And that's exactly what I said. It would be Agatha Christie meets Lost. And they're like, how are you going to pull that off? And I was like, I have absolutely no idea. Let's find out together. Let's go on this journey together because I don't know where this is going.
So we're going to talk a lot about that journey throughout this. But I did want to ask, because the book's been out for a while now. I think it came out either in the spring or in the early summer now. And so what's the reception been like? What have people been saying about it? But more importantly, like, what's this kind of part of the book process for you as an author to be like, the book's been out for a while and it's something you wrote a while ago, but you're revisiting it. So what's in the life of this book in your kind of career? What's this time like for you?
It used to be really hard. So it's interesting how much it shifted. When I wrote Seven Deaths, my first novel, there was no pressure on the writing of it at all. So that was a joy. So that took about 3 years, but I had another job. I was doing that because obviously there's no publishing deal there. There's nobody waiting for it. Nobody knows you're doing it. So I just did it in my free time. I didn't have kids back then. I didn't have those responsibilities. And then I remember when it got bought and the publisher took it on, my stress started to build towards publication because it was my first book and I knew if the book didn't do well, that would be the start and end of my career basically was launched out of that book. And thankfully it did do well. Devil came out, then the pressure shifted for my second novel to the writing of it because suddenly I had to follow up what had been quite a successful first book. So I was suddenly really worried about the writing of it. I was really worried about whether I could do something that was different and interesting and whether I was, going to sink my career with the second book. And then it came out in the pandemic. So there was no events. There was no one to talk to. It was all Zoom like this. So it was a really weird thing. It came out and there was no pressure on me because I didn't have to go anywhere. Like no books were selling particularly well, so I didn't have to worry about that. It was just like launching a book into space, effectively. And then this one, it's all been basically horrendous because the writing of it was really difficult. It's the hardest book I've ever written, just trying to make it all work. And then by the time I got to the end of it, I was thinking to myself, is this book so strange? And is it so out there that it's not going to sell any copies whatsoever? And I just sat on my hands waiting for it to come out, absolutely terrified, convinced that 5 people were going to buy it. It was horrific, but it's gone really, really well. So it was a #1 in the UK, which is my home market. It was on the USA Today bestseller list in the US. It's done brilliantly. It's still selling really well, and the reviews seem to be good. But the other part that's changed now is I don't really look at the reviews too much. I used to live and die on them for my first couple of books, and now I tend to look at the trades because they're the first ones that come out. Get an idea of which way the wind's blowing, and then I sort of hunker down and stop looking because you drive yourself mad.
So you mentioned that process, and I'm fascinated by the process. So I think in the either the acknowledgments or the interview that's at the back of the book, you say and when you start with enormous ideas when you
Mm.
start writing a book. So what was the enormous idea at the start of writing this book?
This one was actually a couple of enormous ideas. That's what made it so hard. I initially wanted there's a character in the book called Abby, for people who haven't read the novel, and she is in everybody's head. She can hear all their thoughts, and she's constantly interacting with other characters in the book. So when a murder happens on this island, she knows immediately who did it. And I had to come up with a reason why she couldn't just tell you and just solve it immediately. So I knew I wanted that dual thing, but I also wanted it when I first started writing that, what immediately happened was everybody was like, well, it's clearly Abby then. Why would she be going in a different direction and coming up with a reason why, she may not be, I'm not spoiling anything, but she may not be the killer. She may not be responsible for this stuff. It took a long while to figure out. It was really, really tough. And I tried so many variations of it, so many drafts, so many edits of it. They just didn't work. Like I wrote now, famous story I've told it elsewhere, but the first draft of this book was about 130,000 words and it got threw away. Like completely, first word to last word. There's none of it remaining. There's none of it in this book because that was me trying to figure out what this book, how it would work and what it would look like. And in that first version, Abby was your protagonist. Abby was like, she was literally the one driving the story forward, trying to work it out. And she'd had this bit of this thing that she couldn't say, and it just didn't work. So it had to be shifted around. New protagonists had to be brought up. People had to be elevated from the suspect pool. It took a lot of figuring out and a lot of rejigging.
So I wanted to that's interesting because I wanted to talk about I've seen the interviews that you've given that you threw a whole book away, and I'm sorry about that. That sounds like a lot of work to toss in the bin. Um, what when you say it's not working, and I'm interested in this because I have a writing project literally right next to me right now that's in that state of like I have no idea
Mm,
what I'm doing with it, right? Or I have some ideas, but it's just it's a mess of mess, and
mm.
working your way through that, right? So how did you know it wasn't working? Like what was that feeling for you as a writer that you're done, but it's not right?
It's a couple of things. One, it's not very fun. Like I think like reading back and I always try to, while I'm writing, I try to have a reader's eye on it. I try to be the reader as much as I'm the writer as I'm going through. So the questions I'm constantly asking myself as I write something is this fun for the reader? Are they having a good time at this point? Or have they just been sat here for 7 pages, not knowing what's going on and not invested? And is there an emotional beat in there that they can get hold of? Is there something structural that's interesting to them? Is there just a surprise, something they didn't see coming that has just changed the narrative? And if there's none of that, then I don't know what I've been doing with those 7, 8, 10 pages. Like I don't know what they're there for. So I also try and have that idea for it. But the reason I've worked out and when I know things aren't working is because for me personally, you'll have a gut instinct on it, and I won't want to go to my computer in the morning. It will be hard for me to leave my breakfast and go to work. I just won't want to do it. I'll feel like there's a force field, something pushing me away from it. And that's as I was writing that first draft, the one that I threw away, that became every day. It was just like it was really hard for me to get out to the office. It was really hard for me to convince myself to do this. And I was finishing the day just feeling defeated, just feeling beat up by it. And it's just writing. It's not a hard job. I'm not digging holes or going into space. I'm just trying to write a novel. But I get to the end really dejected and really down and really just sort of like, I hate this. I hate it so much. But and the thing I've learned over the course of just writing three quite complicated books is there is a value in that first draft, even if no one ever sees it. It is just your mirror. It is your way of working out what's important to you and what you're interested in. So I persevered and I fought and I went to my computer every day just so I would have everything laid out in front of me and I could see was what within that mess, like you just said, like what within your mess do I enjoy? What do I like? And for me, it was this character, Emery, who wasn't the protagonist, but I really liked writing her, so she became the protagonist of the next one. I was like, okay, that's it. So I don't know how we do it, but she is now the protagonist. Right, boom, elevate
Is
her.
I'm
No, no,
sorry, but
please.
no, was that the moment I was going to ask next? Was that the moment figuring out Emery as the protagonist? Was that for lack of a to make it maybe a mystery moment here, but the aha moment of like or was there an aha moment where you like started after you switched it and started working through those other drafts that like you started to figure it out or like it became fun? Do you remember any kind of moment of that it struck, or was it just kind of like a drip by drip, day by day type thing, and it kind of evolved?
There was a couple of things. Like one, I had the wrong murder. I remember in the first draft, so I killed the wrong person, and I killed them for the wrong reason. So everything that you can do in a murder mystery, I was wrong. I had the wrong investigator, I had the wrong victim, and I had the wrong motive. Um, so the big one I remember was one realizing that I'd enjoyed writing Emery, and that worked. The bigger one was realizing that this concept I had of a omniscient narrator who was, because in the first draft as well, the omniscient narrator was talking back to the reader, so they were acting as though they could see the reader through the page. And I realized that that for me was all for me. That was me just entertaining myself, but it was not entertaining for anybody else. It wasn't an entertaining thing to read. It was too winky and it was too clever and it was too distracting. And once I had that, and once I was like, right, that's the thing that you started with, and that was your premise, and that was your holy grail, and that's the reason you started writing this book, but it's not working. Now have courage and toss it. And once I was able to do that and be like, okay, that's not what we're going to do that anymore. The entire it was so liberating. Like it was just I felt free. And that's when I started being like, right, okay, now Emery's in charge of this novel. What's Emery's story? Who does she love? Like, how are they impacted by what's going on here? How can I? And I also, and as I said at the top, I had the wrong murderer, I had the wrong victim. And by sort of freeing myself from the sort of like the structural thing that I was trying to do and promoting Emery, I could then bring someone into the story who was like, right, what's her attachment to this person? How does this death affect her? What's going on here? And all that stuff started to flow out of that. It was just, yeah, you know what it's like. You're just sifting through and you just try something new, and all of a sudden your imagination sparks again.
So who was the first murder, or who was the original murder?
Who was originally murdered? I can't say because they're still murdered.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
they're still
okay.
murdered. Oh, it is a spoiler book. Yeah,
Spoiler
yeah, yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a character called Adil,
Hmm.
who's in the novel, who was an outcast in the novel. But originally, they came back to the village with a warning, like a dire warning about something that was going on. It was a very sort of like fantasy thing of somebody sort of stumbling into the village, then collapsing and dying. And when they looked at the body, they realised it wasn't the elements that had killed them; it was a person. But everybody was accounted for. And so usually they would turn to Abby to be like, "Hey, what happened here?" And Abby was like, "Well, I can't tell you." So it started off like that, but it just didn't work. The sort of reason the information that came, the information meant that my protagonist wasn't uncovering anything new about the world. She was just uncovering something that somebody else had already uncovered. So it always felt like she was a step behind another character and another character's motivations and another character's revelations. It was sort of like it was somebody else's journey that she was just retracing. And it felt very tedious and everything felt very anticlimactic because the question was always not why are you here? It was why was a dill here before you? What was a dill doing? What are we? You're trying to figure out someone else's story right after the fact. So I wanted to put her into the position of everything's new, everything's impacting her firsthand. It's her journey. The more she the more she invests in this mystery, the more danger she brings on herself, and the more danger she brings on the island, and the more danger she brings on her friends.
So the one of the conceits of the world in the book is that there's a fog that has overtaken the entire world except for this island where the story takes place. And it was hard for me and my wife, who just read it too, to read that book and not think of the fog kind of coming out of COVID as a very
Hmm.
COVID I don't say metaphor. Maybe it is. I mean, was there what? Tell me about the development of the fog as almost a character in the book, because it really is
Yeah.
the I don't know. It's kind of like the impending doom of the entire book, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always have one of these. So in Seven Deaths, my first, not Seven and a Half Deaths, sorry for the US. For me, I had a character called the Footman who was like stalking around, killing people. And it's just, I always have a mechanism to raise tension. I always have something. So it's not just a case of, this is the way I want to write Agatha Christie and Holmes-like stories. But generally, those characters were sort of unmolested through the story. They were never in danger. They were just allowed to get on with solving the murder. In a few stories, there was an attempt on their life, but never anything major. And I always want to make sure that my character, my investigator, is in danger. I always want them to have a secondary threat that they've got to deal with. So it was the footman in the first book. I had a leper in the second book on
Mhm.
in 16 in the devil on the ship, and for this one it was the fog. It's interesting what you said about COVID because you were completely correct about that, but I didn't know that.
Hmm.
So what I started with was I needed a mechanism. I wanted to write a locked island mystery. I told you, so it was like Agatha Christie does Lost. I wanted to lock everyone on this island. I couldn't work out how to do it. I wanted there to be a reason why they couldn't get off the island. So I had this Q&A with myself constantly where I was like, right, they're stuck on an island. Why can't they get off the island? Poisonous fog surrounds them. Okay, great. Well, great. There's a poisonous fog. That's fantastic. And I was like, so what's happened to everyone else? And then it's like, oh, they're all dead. Oh, great, right. I'm writing an apocalypse novel. Okay, right. We're writing an apocalypse novel. So is this in the future then? It does appear to be in the future. Okay, so it's a futuristic apocalypse novel and there's a poisonous fog. Where's the poisonous fog come from? So that's what I was doing. I was having this two-hander with myself, asking questions, answering the questions, and using that to build the scaffolding in the world. So obviously all this stuff's just percolating up. Now, secondary to this, when the pandemic hit, I was writing my second novel, Devil. And I remember all the discourse around it, especially in publishing, was like about these novels. It was going to be about COVID novels, COVID inspired novels, pandemic novels. And I was like, fuck that. I am not doing that. Nobody wants to go back to that time. I don't want to deal with it. I don't have any unresolved issues around COVID. I just hated it. I think everyone hated it. There's nothing for me to work out. I'm not doing a pandemic novel. Refuse. I go away, I write this stupid book, and then when I come out of it, the first thing that happens, I go and do an event. Someone puts their hand up and like, oh, is this a COVID novel? And I'm like, no, not remotely. And they're like, but there's a fog that kills everyone who touches, and these people are trapped and can't go anywhere, and they live in this incredible. And I was like, holy shit, I've written a pandemic novel. It'll get you, even if you mean it not to.
Well, for what it's worth, I didn't jump out at me. I was thinking about it, and if I wasn't doing an interview with you, I probably wouldn't have thought of it explicitly as a COVID fog. But here we are. So, for what it's worth, it was a COVID novel, but it did not read that way.
Thank you.
So, one thing I did specifically want to ask about the book, and my wife and I both love this. My wife actually said she wants to steal this idea, but only if people understood why she was using it, is the mourning lanterns.
Mm,
And so I'm going to read directly from the book. They're made of colored rice paper and strung on ropes between two wings of the barracks. There's a lantern for every person in the village, and each one contains a scrap of paper on which they've written a kindness Mattis, the person who died, not a spoiler, it's like page 20,
mm,
did for them. This is the way they revere the dead. They remember what they offered the world and what everybody else has to do to fill the gap. There are no prayers here, no thoughts of an afterlife. The reward for a good life is the living of it. First of all, that's beautiful, beautiful
mm.
writing. Where did that idea come from?
I like the idea of a society. So in the book, everybody knows that they die at the age of 60. So they've got that. They know what day they're going to die. From the moment they're born, they understand when they die. And that's part of like obviously one of the mysteries of the novel. But I was like, if you had that information, what would you do with it? How would it alter your culture? Because we as a culture are caught somewhere between the two stools, right? Of mourning our dead and celebrating the life. Like, and I think I veer much more towards celebrating life and celebrating. I genuinely that quote about the reward for a good life is the living of it. I genuinely do believe that. I genuinely believe that it doesn't matter how many people turn up to your funeral. It's completely irrelevant. Sort of like, the impact you have should be the impact you have on a day-to-day basis. You should see what you're doing. You should see whether you're a good or a bad person or what you're bringing to the world. And I love the idea of that. And I love the idea of a society that had that viewpoint and thought life was something to be celebrated and a death wasn't something to be feared. It was just the end point of this journey. And they don't worry about afterlives and they don't worry about God and they don't have a religion to tell them it's going to be okay. They know it's okay because they lived it every day and they did the absolute best they could. And it ties into this society being they're all about living for each other, caring for each other, having affection and time for each other. That's the greatest thing that they can do is help another human being at some point in the day. So it was part of just figuring out what this new society, this 122 people, these survivors on the island, what kind of world they've built when everybody else died away, and how they treat death. And I almost wanted to go through their culture sort of piece by piece. Like, what does their poetry look like? What does their literature look like? What is their music now? But it's just you just don't have time, and you don't want to get too in the weeds with this stuff. But I had a headcanon, just everything, how it would all look, and this was the one bit that came out of it because obviously a murder mystery deals with death quite intimately.
I was gonna, you answered my next question because I was gonna ask, like, in a mystery novel, of course, kind of almost everything has to relate to the mystery. It's kind of
Mm.
one of the rules of mystery. And I've been thinking a lot about structure and the things of mystery novels because I've been reading a lot of them lately, especially the Benjamin Stevenson books, the which are, I know you blurbed one of them,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the train one, which spoiler alert is the best thing I've read lately. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But I just love that idea of the structure of a mystery novel. Really, one of the main constraints being like everything in there has to connect at some
Mm.
point. And so I'm wondering the different constraints of a mystery novel, what are some of the ones that you adhere to and how do they how do they help you as a writer?
I don't think they help me as a writer in the sense that I have an idea of what my readers are anticipating and expecting, and that gives me license to cheat them and trick them and sort of subvert the things that they expect to
Mhm.
happen. So it goes back to that thing I said earlier. I always write with my reader hat on. I'm always thinking about, I assume my audience are the smartest audience. I assume that they've read all the murder mysteries, they know all the rules, they know most of the characters, that are fey with procedurals as much as sort of like locked rooms, and that they have that body of knowledge that I am also writing from, right? Because I'm coming from that same canon, I'm coming from that same tradition. So if they've got it all and I've got it all, then it becomes chess. Like, what are you expecting me to do? How can I not do it, or how can I do it in a way that surprises you, or maybe move it further in the book so it's coming at a different point. So that's how I use it. Most of the time with the rules, I'm trying to wriggle my way around them a little bit. Like with
Mhm.
this one, I wanted to have a book, all that stuff in the village in the first almost like 5,000 words of the book, where you're seeing their life. If I'd been left to my own devices and had £40 million in the bank, I would have written 130,000 words of that. I just would have just built a world and just lived in it for a little bit, and then eventually somewhere down the line had a murder on like
Mhm.
day 500 or something. Because I loved operating in that world and thinking it through and seeing how it'd work. It was just tremendously fun for me. But as you said, at some point there's got to be a body. But I always try and mess with like so in Devil, um, the body in that novel doesn't drop until two-thirds of the way. So I tried to push the death as far as I could. Really, really, how far can I push the murder and still have it be a murder mystery? That's one of the challenges to me. This one is kind of like, um, the investigator has to reckon with murder. She's never experienced. Nobody on this island knows what murder is. There's no violence. There's no fighting. There's no pushing or shoving. So before she can even understand why anybody like why this murder occurred, she has to understand murder itself. She has to reckon with it and reckon with it in a society. So that's what I was trying to do with this one: was create a society where murder doesn't exist. So like it's not a sort of like Miss Marple who gets there and is like, oh, that person's been murdered and can just get on with it. There has to be this emotional component, this philosophical component, and see if you can do that in a way that's not fucking boring. Um, so I'm always in all of my novels, I'm always looking at all the rules and all the tropes and all the guidelines and trying to be like, right, can I push that one a little bit? Can I wriggle around with that one? I don't think I ever drop them. I don't think I ever get rid of any. I think they're all in there, but I just trying to do interestingly different things with them.
So you said something interesting when you were talking about the Emery as the lead character and why one of the reasons why she worked. And you mentioned, I don't know if I got this phrase right, but in the story there she's uncovering things about her world and kind of like learning about them. And it just struck me again, having just read the Benjamin Stevenson books, but how that feels like an important kind of unspoken component of a good mystery novel, right? It's not just that they're procedural ABC, but that there's like this like the gentle unraveling of everything before you come to the big scene at the end where everyone's in the parlor and you lay it all out.
Yeah, I think the idea usually in a Christie or a Golden Age is that there's a seedy underbelly to the world, right? So everybody, most people understand how the world operates. They know the class system in the UK, so they'll understand who fits where, and that will bring certain motivations. And then the detective, who's nearly always an outsider, is allowed to drift between, and then they have this seedy underbelly. They can see the cogs and wheels that are turning this, and then they start digging through people's secrets and the unspoken things and the things that most of us have in our life, like, sorry, most characters in Golden Age will have in our life, not us, but like blackmails and adultery and sort of illegitimate children and all these sorts of things that were sort of like scuttlebutt and were sort of rumors. They have to uncover them. In my novels, the way I try to do this is I hate a red herring. I really dislike a red herring. I think a red herring's a
Mhm.
very authorial thing. I think I've talked about this past. That a red herring is an author stamping into the middle of the story and putting down something just to distract a reader. It doesn't exist for the detective, it doesn't exist for the characters, it exists for the reader. And it's the most obvious sort of stomping into the middle of a novel and just sticking something down. And it very rarely, if you take that story apart, connects to anything else. Whereas what I prefer is I prefer putting a lot of the wrong mysteries ahead of my detective and making them work through all those mysteries to get to the mystery that's actually. So, there is a murder, that's what they're trying to get to, but first they do have to uncover the adultery, they do have to uncover the blackmail, they do have to uncover, and all those mysteries in and of themselves could be a book, but they're not the mystery that they're there to solve. So I think that's a sort of roundabout way of talking about what we're talking about. I think when you have like a novel like this, it should be about 15 different stories all happening at once. Like one has the greatest weight, but the others should be like lighter threads, but they should still need to be complete beginning, middle, and end stories.
Well, and in this book, in Murder at the End of the World, you have that, and spoiler alert coming up, but you have the murder, but then you have the discovery that they're simulacrum or whatever, if I'm getting
Yeah.
the word right, that they're, almost clones basically, or like technologically created people, and the kind of like all the unfolding, the murder is in a lot of ways in this book, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, the catalyst for not just solving the murder, but finding out the truth about the world, about setting up the world after, and all of that by design, by the main character's design, I
Mhm.
think, if I was reading it right.
You were, yeah, completely. Like I love the idea of that. I knew once I'd worked out that I was writing a sort of post-apocalyptic, almost John Wyndham-esque piece of sci-fi that had a murder mystery in it. My mind immediately went to what is the most sci-fi thing that I can do? Like, I've got to have proper big sci-fi in. If I'm going to write a bit of a sci-fi novel, I want to have a big sci-fi idea. So we've got artificial intelligence with Abby. We've got the voice in their head is an artificial intelligence, and we've got the simulacrum. We've got the people who were designed to serve humanity, and that's what the Islanders are. The 122 people. They're all just like the evolution of a people that was designed to be slaves to other people, effectively, to be unthinking automatons who just do what you want. And as it says in the novel, they were designed to be like your girlfriend if you were lonely, or your mum if you wanted someone to cook for you when you were 70. Like they can be anything you want to be, but they were supposed to be blank slates. I love the idea of that, and it felt very connected to us as a species. I could see it happening. I could see us doing it. It doesn't feel that outlandish. You say it in isolation, it's like, oh God, that's wild. And then you're like, well, actually, no, it feels like what we do if we had the technology. But the key to that was sort of to have a solution to the mystery that took that in, but was not about that, if that makes sense, because that's
Hmm.
not very fulfilling. Like if it's sort of like, oh, the Summercrims were killed them because they're not real, that's just I want the reader to be able to guess the end. I want them to have enough clues that they can suss it out. And that wouldn't have worked. So I had to have a conclusion to the mystery that was based in emotion and had like a genuine emotional thing that was resonant with the people who were reading the book. But it had to bring that in. That was a pain in the ass to plot as well.
How satisfying, just in general, with mystery novels for you writing them? Because the most satisfying moment for me, and realizing as I've read more and gotten older, how much I love the coming together at the end, like the
Mm-hmm.
famous parlor, like the parlor scene or whatever you'd call them, but the way like all the threads are tied together, and I imagine that's a lot of work as an author. But is it all? What's the combination of work making sure all those are tied together, but also are they fun to write? Because they feel fun to write.
I think finding a way. half the challenge is finding a way in which they are fun to write, right? Because they can easily not be. So I usually start off just by writing them flat without any location whatsoever, just so that when the description is put out in front of the audience, it makes as much sense as it can, and it has all the details that they'd expect, and it has the feeling of that Christie grand reveal. But I never want to do the parlor reveal because that's hers for me. That's like, I think anyone who does that's on a hiding to nothing, because then you've explicitly tied your book back to Agatha Christie. Like you just, that's her thing. You might as well just have Poirot or Marple pop in at the end and do it. It's exactly the same. So I want the feel of that, but I always try and put them in different places. I always try and move them to somewhere that a location that you've been seeing all the way through the novel, and I can then flip what that location means and what it's about and what it's offering to the reader. So yeah, I start with blank pages, I do all the descriptors, and then I come and work out where it's actually going to happen, and then I sort of chop those chapters up and start moving things around to put it in that. And that's usually very fun once you found the right location. But again, it takes me at least 3 or 4 drafts to find that location and find that place where I can do it. Because I usually want some action as well. I usually want it to be under some pressure. I don't want it just to be a leisurely laying out of the facts. I want there to be some like life or death thing happening that means they've got to A, explain it, B, explain it quickly, but C, have to do it in the right way, otherwise they die.
Which is exactly what happened in this novel. That was great.
Mhm.
So I mentioned the best thing I've read lately, and I'm going to be careful mentioning Agatha Christie because last time I had you on, I said how much I loved Murder on the Orient Express, and you threw that into the fire, which is fair. So I'll ask you, what's the best thing that you've read lately?
What's the best thing? I have just finished A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Again, which is years and years old, and it won the Pulitzer, and everybody knows about the book apart from me. And I just finished that in absolute awe. Like it's just a beautiful piece of writing. It's a wonderful piece of structure. Um, it's just filled with real people and conversations that sound genuine and naturalistic. And it never, at one point, do you ever know where it's going and what it's going to do next. And I loved it to pieces. I actually finished that this morning, so you've got to be very, very fresh on that. And I just finished a book called Starvaker before that, which is a sort of gothic horror set in like British countryside, and that was very weird and creepy and good as well. So yeah, I'm just trying to stay away from mysteries a little bit at the moment. I'm trying to read in a lot of other genres, so I'm gonna go and find some sci-fi next, I think.
So have you started your next novel yet? Not to put pressure on you, but have you started it? Are you in that workspace yet, or are you just kind of laying low for now?
No,
Okay.
I'm laying low. I got really, really burnt out. So I wrote 3 books and had 2 children in the space of about five
Ooh.
years or something. So it was a lot. And I got to the end of Last Murder and was like, I need a little break here. I just need to take a step back. So I've got a couple of short stories that I'm working on for different anthologies. I've got some TV work that I'm doing as well.
Nice.
So there's a few different projects and just nice little bits and things that don't require me to think, right, in 2.5 years, I'll have finished this project, which is just murder.
Well, look forward to reading those stories. We'll have links to your books and to the ones you mentioned in the show notes for this. And Stuart, this was awesome as always. Thanks again for taking the time.
Oh, I appreciate it, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to The Other 51. Special thanks to Stuart Turton for taking the time to be on the episode this week, and to Marissa Turton for helping set everything up and get this on the calendar. You can find links to all of Stuart's books and everything we talked about at our show notes this week. Jen Moritz does our graphic design. Ellie Moritz did our music. I'm Brian, and we'll talk to you next time.